We're going to talk to you today about our real-world evidence patient registry that we've built that has asthma, allergy, and immunology patients. And so I'm going to kick off first. You want to say here? Or okay. I thought I would start by just giving you a little bit of background on the consortium itself. So we started in 2013. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. Started as a group of like-minded professionals. We've retained that brand and image. So we now have over 260 board-certified allergist immunologists across the country. We have 30 private community practices. So that is the differentiator is we are all community practice, private practices. A practice for us can be a single physician, single location, or it can be our largest practice is Allergy Partners that has plus 125 physicians and plus 100 locations. So, but all in the community practice. And we treat many, many rare diseases, and that we've really come to appreciate and understand just how many rare disease patients we have as we've built out this registry. But we do three main things at the consortium. We do buy and bill contracts. We started in IG, but we've gone much broader than that. We have always done clinical trials together. Some we do investigator-initiated trials, and some we just join sponsored trials. And then we've had a patient registry that was much more manual data entry, primary immune deficiency focused, but our new registry is all of our patients, all disease states, and it's built with a technology partner, so it's fed nightly with EMR data. So we've kind of taken it to the next level. We have 31 practices now, just added another one, and we have maybe one or two coming through the end of the year, but these are the logos for our practices. As I mentioned, we started as a group that does buy and bill contracts in IG, much broader than that now. We have a number of our members that have labs, a number of our members that have infusion suites. We have tremendous alliances with the industry, both manufacturers and distributors. And we offer all kinds of patient services and specialties and equipment at our various practices. And like I mentioned, we do a lot of clinical research, and we're getting more and more into the consulting services arena, but that's more of a 2024 initiative for us. So the reason we're here today is because one of our primary strategic focuses at the consortium is to be more aware of the patient journey. We certainly see the patients when they come in our clinics, but the journey for the patient is much, much more than just their clinic visit. And so we really have been seeking how can we learn more about all the different points on the patient's journey, because we feel like that is going to increase our speed to diagnosis, especially of these rare disease patients. We hear stories of, decades that people go unidentified. And then we definitely have a passion for advocating for our patients, whether it's through access or payer coverage or education. And then the more we learn from my team's perspective about the practices, we're also seeking ways to help enable the practice from a revenue cycle management. So both the patient focus and then the practice long-term success focus. But we're here today because we're going to tell you how we're trying to get better aware of the patient journey. So one of our challenges as we sought to solve, how can we look at all of our data together, is our network has 15, this is just a sample of 15 different EMRs. And so, we're not a one enterprise, one EMR network. We don't mandate what EMR our members use. And so we sought out a technology partner. And for us, that technology partner was for us to look and find somebody who's been in this rare disease space. And we found a partner in Trio Health. So they've been in the rare disease patient registry space for a decade. And they also partner with Datavant and Komodo, which means our data can be tokenized and joined with claims data. So claims data is very, very commonly purchased out there. But when you power the data with not just the claims, but also the clinical structured and unstructured, and you update it nightly, you have some really amazing insights that you're going to be able to get out of this data. So Trio Health, I mentioned, they're a company out of Colorado, been in the rare disease space for 10 years. They started in Hep C. We are their latest addition in the asthma, allergy, immunology space. And So we're super excited about partnering with them. And I emphasize partner because we didn't want to just give our data away. We wanted to be in control of the data and how it gets used. And we found that with Trio Health, a willing partner. And so some of the situations that the Trio founders sought to solve when they started doing patient registries is, how do we access the unstructured data? So, getting the structured data is pretty easy, right? Get your age, your sex, all that kind of stuff. But getting the clinical notes in the labs is critical to having a much more robust and valuable and insightful database. And 80% of the patient's data of their medical record is in the unstructured. So they've solved that by signing BAAs with the practices that are participating, and so they can actually log in and see the clinical notes and anything that's in a PDF. And that was important to us too. And then the other thing is that they can, by accessing this unstructured and tying to the unstructured, we have a much more complete registry. And that's very important to us, and it's important to manufacturers, and it's going to be very important to patients as we look through the history. And then the other thing is accuracy. So because they sign a BAA, because of the partnership we're in, our physicians and practices connect with Trio and help answer questions that they may have, that the scribe may look at something, think something, but they can confirm back with the actual practice. And the ability to actually validate that data, ensure that the data has been translated accurately with minimum burden to the practice. So they only have to call when they really need some clarification. So the burden of data entry is taken completely off of our practices, and that has really been helpful because that was one of our hindrances in our original patient registry for PID, is it required manual data entry at the practice level, and it was happening one time and not being updated. So the Trio scribes, what they can do, they can go in nightly, they get a flag that says, hey, Dr. O'Connor saw 10 patients yesterday, here are the patients, you need to go in there and look and transcribe their notes and their labs that she did yesterday into structured data. So they're looking at 3,500 patient updates a night, and then they can access the charts, and they're clinically trained to how to look at our patients with the diseases that we treat. They also can process these notes faster. They create what's called smart forms. So once they learn about a disease and key factors they want to capture out of the notes or the structured data, they can have the system learn to extract those key points. So they use these smart forms quite a bit. We can customize the smart form based on the disease if we like. And the end game is we have regulatory grade data that's richer than claims data, richer than other data companies that are out there. And so we were excited to find such a partner with us. And so I mentioned, Trio can deal with any EMR, and that was important to us because we have 15 different ones right now. So, they have the technology and the scribe capability, and they can process it timely, which is important as well. So the way that the scribes help us the most is, making sure we have an accurate diagnosis, flushing out where there's been episodes on the drugs, understanding the non-start or drug switch reasons, which is in the notes, and then looking at other clinical measurements. This would be like some things that show up in the labs as scores or attacks or reactions, and then just really understanding the why a patient discontinues. And all of these factors together are really important for us to understand as the patient moves along their disease journey. So Trio also has a in-house analytical team. They do a lot of publications, over 200 peer-reviewed publications at all kinds of conferences. So we've done 4 of these to date with them, and we're excited to do more, and looking forward to curating our data even further with them. So I'm going to turn it over to Maeve.
Hello. So I'm very excited to be here because this is a project that's very near and dear to my heart because notes. Just because, the patient outcomes, the patient is always at the center of everything that I'm doing as a physician, as the chief medical officer. So this partnership that CIC has with Trio is very near and dear to my heart, as I mentioned. So why build a patient registry? Well, to get data, right? The most important thing is, hold on, sorry, I'm getting my notes. There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so why build a patient registry? So we want to make sure that we can expedite the sharing of all the insights across our CIC. So as Lynn mentioned, and I think she was a little humble when she described who the CIC is, I'm one of them, but it is a group of world-renowned immunologists, and to have the data for all of those patient encounters in one place lets us share insights across region, across state, and hopefully one day across the whole world is my hope. And why is that important? Because of those patient outcomes. We get better patient outcomes because of that. But what is my hope for the registry? First, as I mentioned, patients. We want the patients to have a better outcome. And I can do that by having the registry in my practice. I can see on a day-to-day level what's going on with my patients at their visits or even in between their visits. Also, across the CIC, as I mentioned, we can share those insights and, again, those patient outcomes. The most important thing I really think is to identify the centers of excellence for patients with the diseases that we treat, and again, across other specialties as well.
You want me to do the slides?
I'm a good techie.
Yeah, I'll do the slides.
All right, thank you. All right, so when patients come to see me, the first thing I think about is what have they gone through, right? But the important thing is we need to think about the critical data that can be collected at every step in the patient's journey. So when the patient presents to me in clinic, I'm seeing them in the clinic, in the room, and that's really the bird's eye view that I have. But we need to think back about what they go through on a day-to-day basis. So first of all, they live at home by themselves with their family. They have experiences there. Then they come into my office and they describe their quality of life, their experience, their exposures. They may have had an attempt or a problem that makes them go to the emergency department. They may have had to call 911. They may have had to have an urgent visit either in my office or in an urgent care center or God forbid, in the hospital. But we're getting all of these points here from home to my office to the ambulance to the hospital. All are data points that then lead to possibly a pharmacy visit. We don't know when they go to the pharmacy. We don't know how quickly they get a prescription filled. We don't know necessarily immediately what prescriptions were prescribed at that urgent care visit. We don't know if they're taking their medications when they're at home. So all of these data points are very important to me when I'm taking care of patients. And when we think about this, missing pieces of information, again, I see the patient in the room in front of me, but there's all of these missing pieces of information that I may not have access to at my fingertips, which is why a registry of data such as this is so important. There's that critical data along that journey that we may not have a view onto without a data registry such as this. So the importance, again, is thinking about the excellence in patient advocacy that requires access to data. We need to be able to inform persuasive arguments, not only for patients to make them adhere to the plans that we outline for them when we diagnose them properly and outline a treatment plan, but also for policymakers, payers, and other stakeholders, manufacturers, everybody that's involved in the patient journey. These data, along with the human narrative that we showed in the previous slide, and visuals become an undeniable force to fully describe the impact of a disease and the path towards a solution. So how can CIC practices advocate with this? We can do it again with payers through prior authorizations and copays. When I think about one of my patient journeys with a rare disease called hereditary angioedema, I think about the importance of all of these steps of the journey. So she has hereditary angioedema, and she has these episodes of swelling that can be life-threatening. We proved that the drug that she needed worked to prevent these life-threatening attacks. And we had visual, we had video, we had everything. And we still got denials of the prior authorization for this medication. It took a 10-person phone call, including the patient being there, describing her journey for us to end up getting that prior authorization approved. I think that that process can be streamlined with data such as we have in this registry. And I tell that personal story because it's a true story, and it took probably 29 hours of me and my staff time, not to mention the patient's time and all of the other stakeholders' time and money and effort. So again, the CIC practices can advocate using this registry with manufacturers, primary care physicians, and other specialists who may not be intimately involved with the diseases that we treat, so we can have a collaborative effort in treating our patients and having better patient outcomes. So our CIC Real World Patient Registry, again, as Lynn mentioned, we are across the country. There are 152 linked sites and counting. We are growing. We have measured growth across the CIC. There are 2 million patients across the networks, and again, residing in all 50 states. So we are big, but we, again, are having measured growth and careful growth as we grow registries like this that are so important. As Lynn also mentioned, we have 2 different types of data in the patient registry. We have the structured and the unstructured. And when we think about structured data, we think about things that are easy to get our fingers on, right? The comorbidities, demographics, what's in the social history, what's in the past medical history when we look at a patient note. ICD-10 codes, those are easy in structured data. Then there's the unstructured data, such as lab results, clinic notes, and there's some individuality there. There's some heterogeneity when you think about unstructured data, and we've seen this across the CIC registry. The clinical note details and styles may vary. The labs that people recommend for diagnosis or treatment may also vary. The path to ICD-10 codes differ. The path to ICD-10 codes can be painful. I had to say that because we all know that's true, and ICD-11 is really coming right around the corner. But we know that centers of excellence exist within our CIC, and we are growing even more centers of excellence, all because we have access to the data in our patient registry. So what is the goal of the patient registry? I told you why we wanted to create it. I told you why I'm passionate about it. But we want to look at retrospective analysis. We want to understand how aggregated real-world data can inform patients, providers, payers, and manufacturers about the patient journey. And I will say I put patients there first, too, because an informed patient is an adherent patient, and they can make their outcomes better even with their own participation in their care. But we know that the time to diagnosis for some of these diseases that we treat can be long and costly. And by understanding the journey and the natural history, we can understand patients better and their outcomes can improve. That we know that there are variations in patients, in practices, in drugs, in how they are prescribed, how the prior authorization process works. Regionally, we have seen variations there. And we are getting a better handle on this by having the registry. So when we look at our structured data that we've collected through the CIC, you can see here the ICD-10 codes that are most common. And we have color-coded these sort of by our disease state, as you can see here. But I want to point out 2 important things here. When you look at asthma, you can see that we have nearly 500,000 asthma patients within our registry. And then you see to the right of that EGPA, or eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, one of the rare diseases that we treat. And you see only 383 patients. And if you don't know that EGPA is only 1 in 50,000 in the United States, 383 doesn't sound like a big number. That is a huge number. I am considered a national expert on EGPA, and I have 9 patients. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a huge number. So from asthma, one of the more common diseases that we treat, all the way to one of the rare ones, you can see how the numbers are huge in the registry that we have. And we have an average of 4.5 years of EMR history. And this is very important because when you think about real-world studies, which we're going to talk about in a second, certainly with pharmaceutical companies and looking at real-world data, 4.5 years is where statistical significance of patients is very important and is what is looked at as being standardized as what is used then for decisions going forward. So looking at structured data, looking at proactively identifying gaps in treatment in an individual patient in front of me again in my clinic. You can see here that the portal here through Trio provides individual practice portal view. It's kind of hard to see here on the slide, but what this is telling us is how an individual practice works, but how each individual patient is affected too. We can see the structured data not only like when they get a drug, if they've gotten the drug refilled, if they've taken the drug, how many days they have been with or without the drug, what percentage of time, and then what outcomes could be because of having or not having that medication. So we can see it all the way down to the granular level of each patient, but again, this is proactively identifying gaps in patient treatment. We can locate patients who are overdue for an office visit or a refill, and we can pinpoint patients who are missing key disease assessments, labs, and scores. I can tell you that oftentimes I will wake up in the middle of the night and I'll say, I wonder when Mr. Smith is coming back. With this kind of access, I never have to wonder that again because I'll have that at my fingertips knowing, wait a second, we know that Mr. Smith hasn't been here because we know this patient hasn't been here this long or hasn't had a refill in this long. And this is the kind of data that is just paramount importance for, again, patient outcomes and collaboration across specialties as well. This slide here just is very, very briefly just looking at structured data example. When we think about digihalers looking at asthma, you can see here that we have the digihaler that's in the patient's hands going into the app, and then that data goes across to the provider, myself, and then into the Trio database across the entire CIC so we can see those outcomes that we are talking about. Now, I want to mention that the inhaler here is just one example of the innovation that we can use across the registry. So unstructured data, again, I mentioned physician notes can be a little bit varied across physicians, and certainly we saw that they are varied across the CIC, but it was an opportunity for us with our hereditary angioedema registry because we were able to see attack frequency, attack location, and resolution of attack for those patients who experienced the swelling attacks from their hereditary angioedema. And there were over 3,000 office visits that were documented across all patients in the data set, which is a huge number. And we had over 700 patients at the time of this slide, but that number of patients is also increasing. I mentioned to Lynn that I saw a patient earlier this morning that isn't included in this yet, but will be hopefully later tonight when I get uploaded. Yes, there are 6,000 diagnosed in the US, and we have this many office notes in our registry. So that again says a lot about a very rare disease that we all see a lot of, at least across the CIC. So again, unstructured data, thinking about the why behind discontinuations. Why do patients stop the medication? Is it something to do with an adverse event, which we hope is not the case? Is it lack of efficacy? Is it something else going on at home? Again, think of that slide at home, the pharmacy, did they go to the emergency room? All those different reasons. Administration or dosing problems. Perhaps somebody doesn't want a needle. Perhaps someone prefers a pill. Is the patient requesting something different? Maybe they saw an ad. Maybe one of the Facebook direct-to-consumer advertising campaigns worked and they're in the office wanting it for that, or they stopped until they could talk to a physician. But all of these reasons are easier to access because of the registry. We see regional payer issues as well. We also see polypharmacy challenge. Patients think they need to be on multiple things, or they've seen multiple providers that aren't communicating because of the EMR problem. When we got EMRs, we were told, oh, they're all going to communicate. This is going to make our life so much easier. It hasn't necessarily, but through this registry, we've been able to have more streamlined communication. So goal 2 for the patient registry is perspective, improving participation in clinical trials, advocating for patients, and broadening the community practice awareness of tools to improve that time to diagnosis. The average time to diagnosis for some of the diseases that we treat, hereditary angioedema, 9 years, primary immune deficiency disorders, 9 years, and I know you all are all familiar with that. But through the registry, we can efficiently identify cohorts of patients for studies. So the sponsor study decides that they would like to consider a study. The clinical protocol is developed with inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we can do a database query of the Trio CIC app database and using the clinical protocol, asking the questions, and it spits out whether or not we have the appropriate population and where those patients may or may not be located so that we can get this study underway. That means that the studies happen faster, more efficiently, and more cost effectively. And that means, again, near and dear to my heart, getting those patients hopefully better answers, better treatments quicker. So another thing that we can do with our registry is creating disease scorecards for community practice use. So I've mentioned the collaboration among specialists, right? Some of the rare diseases we treat, our patients will show up in the emergency room, and the emergency department physician may have never heard of the disease that the patient is presenting with. So we have developed a scorecard for one disease already, mastocytosis, mast cell activation disorder, and just generally looking at lab values, comorbidities, allergies, sensitivities, other common themes that go along with these rare patients so that when they present in a community practice that maybe is not as familiar or is in a collaborative relationship with an expert, they can then see reviewing and knowing that they're taking better care of the patient. We can then review confirmed patients using the scorecard throughout the registry. We can apply learning and predictors across the network again, and then again, increasing that non-specialist primary care and emergency department physician awareness outside of the CIC network. So not only will the CIC network patients perhaps be part of these studies, but we could get studies to have the reach throughout all specialties, which of course none of these diseases only present to one specialist, right? That would be great, but that would also mean the diagnosis wouldn't be delayed. And that's the whole purpose of creating these scorecards, is to, again, decrease that diagnosis delay. So why follow-up improves adherence? I think the left-hand side of this slide is really telling, because it shows that the average person is about 80% adherent to what they are prescribed or what they should do, right? And probably everyone in the room takes their vitamins about 80% of the time, exercises about 80% of the time. There's some people that really just don't do it at all. They're not doing anything they're supposed to do or anything that's been prescribed. And then there's some that are overachievers and they want to do everything right, or they're the ones calling and saying, I want to change my medication, that we catch in the data registry, right? So this helps us because medication counseling has been associated with a 30% increase in medication adherence, 24% reduction in 30-day hospital readmission, and 30% reduction in emergency department visits. So this not only helps save money for the patient and help save money across healthcare systems, manufacturers, but obviously you can imagine the impact on the outcomes globally on the cost of healthcare. Not to mention the costs we can't account for, the social, mental, and all the other things that occur when patients are adherent to their plan and being healthy. So data insights can also drive awareness of unmet needs and trends in the real-world population. I mentioned real-world data earlier in the 4.5 years when I mentioned that we had 4.5 years in the TRIO database. But we know that treatment disparities in certain patient cohorts, social determinants of health, payer approval and denial trends across the network. We can also see patterns of patient discontinuation across geography. Also sees the impacts of the patient attributes on their treatment and outcomes, but whether it's socioeconomic, geographic, or other. And we know that the FDA issued guidance on drug and biologic submissions with real-world data and real-world evidence. And when I describe this when I'm lecturing to different audiences, I describe, controlled data studies that get a drug to FDA approval are kind of like the Petri dish, right? They're very controlled, direct observed therapy, very different from when that patient's out in the wild or in the real world getting the medication, and all of the things that can influence that. And that's where real-world data is so important and helps us, and that's another reason why the patient registry is so important. So data for better insights and better outcomes. Again, I mentioned retrospectively for the manufacturers and others, assessing market share, polypharmacy trends, switching reasons. It's very important why patients switch, and we still don't understand all the subtleties of this, obviously. Payer differences, reviewing comorbidities, and aligning to claims data. And looking at prospectively, patient education, addressing those polypharmacy concerns and reasons, resolving preventable side effects, supporting payer negotiations, reassessing treatment to improve outcomes, and again, the clinical trials that are so important to get us moving forward, especially in rare disease, which has that delay to diagnosis. So now we can take some questions and answers. I think I'm on time, am I?
So the question is, have we considered presenting it to CMS as a demonstration project? So no, you guys are the first conference we presented at. But great point. So we started our journey with TRIO in the summer of 2021. We really hit critical mass in first quarter of 2022. It's one thing to bring the data in, then you have to curate it, right? So we are pretty far along in the curation process, but not quite ready for prime time at CMS. But would love to understand. I personally have not heard of that opportunity, so would love to understand that a little bit better. But we're early in our journey with our patient registry.
And it's certainly something I have spoken with Brent, who's the head of TRIO, and we have talked about that, but we aren't ready for prime time with that yet, but it's on our list of it's our wish list.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so question is about, are we pursuing value-based contracts with our payers? So we have not yet. I came to this conference last year, and that was the first time I'd really gotten more aware of the value-based contracts. And I do not believe today any of our practices do that, but this would certainly be a path to that. We are helping some of our members with their payer contract negotiations today and using some of this data, but not from a value-based perspective, just from a renewal. So certainly an opportunity in the future as we learn more about how to do those value-based contracts. That my understanding is they're still a little new to a lot of the community practices.
And that's absolutely true. But remember when I got up here and I just said, I'm very passionate about this and there's a multitude of reasons. It's because I can see all of those avenues that you're asking questions about that we're not quite there yet. But hopefully we will get there if it makes sense. We certainly have the data to support something like that. So I can tell you that one of the things we learned about the heterogeneity of the physician documentation was that we could use our data that we had and create a standardized template. So for hereditary angioedema, for example, we have created one that all of our members have adopted and are now using with their hereditary angioedema patients. And yes, we are collecting every tiny bit of data that we can that can be important for our patient outcomes. So I was part of that project to make that standardized sheet for that particular disease. We wanted to do it across all of our diseases, and all of that information is being collected. We don't have any of that data with us here today, but we do have some with hereditary angioedema, with PIDD, and with mast cell activation disorders.
I mean,
So yes, and I think it's important what you say. I think in some ways we're shying away from some of that for social reasons and things like that. But when it comes to diseases, we cannot deny how important that is. And then going forward, even with research and all the other opportunities that this provides, absolutely. Great question. Thank you.
I would just layer on the way that the EMR integration works is it's a push of all fields, all patients, right? So if those fields are in the EMR, whether it's through a smart form or through a standard field that the practice has in the EMR and populates, the key is populates, right? Because we know that often that is noted as an option, race is open as an optional field, right? So the key is it has to be populated. But we do have that opportunity, like Dr. O'Connor said, if this is something that we want to proactively encourage our members to collect, whether it's for a specific disease and a specific smart form. We can't go back and change history, but we can, move forward and collect that sort of information and communicate that across our network.
And just as a point of interest in my own practice, I noticed in my EMR that there was a choice of, patient, race, sexual orientation, religion, and it says prefers not to answer, refuses to answer. I actually took that button off of mine to try to get the data. You can't force somebody to answer, but that would make my text say, just put that, and then they wouldn't ask the question or delve into it because of discomfort or, so. Yeah, so that's another important point. And I learned that by becoming a participant in the registry. So it was very, very helpful.
I mean, we do get like zip codes and stuff like that, so we can, tie patients to a physical location and tie that to the demographics of that physical location. So that is there. Yeah, we get that question actually. Genentech has asked me that question before because they're trying to understand the access deserts and things like that. So
well, and when you think about heterogeneity, let's just say asthma, a more common disease, we know that not all of the biologics work in every patient every time, right? There's a reason for that, whether it's genetic, whether it's racial, there's so many different permutations, and having this kind of registry helps us look at those. Not yet.
Yeah.
I know.
As an OT, you should.
Absolutely, 110%. I agree with you. Not yet. Again, we mentioned heterogeneity of physicians, and we have not only the EMRs, but we also had some that were not on EMR. So we have now gotten it very finely tuned so that we can expand to those important data points in the slide that, like when I said home, there's so much at home remember Dr. House used to go to the home and inspect the house, right?
Yeah,
So-
no, I mean,
One of my favorite shows. I'm sure that shocks everyone in the audience. But exactly what you're saying, because that impacts why they may discontinue a medication, why they may have had a delayed diagnosis. Everything impacts. It's an excellent point, and we're going to take that home.
Yeah, I
they
think,
talk to us a lot more than they
Yeah.
talk to the doctor because they're nervous around the doctor.
right.
But we live in their home for like a few weeks.
That's a great,
Yeah,
great point.
So one thing about the data, just to say, that is possible. Because I mentioned in our slides earlier, the way that the Trio Health Registry is set up, it is what's called tokenized data. So there's a de-identified registry. That's what we're mining and looking for trends. And then there's an identified registry. So there's a token that from the de-identified can tell the identified which particular patient is this. But the thing with the tokenized data is you can join it to claims. So I don't know enough about what happens in your world, but you know, if the result of your visit to the home results in a claim, we can join that information through the Datavant Komodo capability of joining the data. So it's a possibility. We're just not doing it right now. I mean, so many people buy claims data, which is good. It's something, but it's so difficult to mine. Most manufacturers don't have in-house analytic capabilities. And that's why we like Trio so much, is they have that, plus they can join other data sets. So it's possible.
And I think when Lynn was mentioning our PIDD registry initially before the partnership with Trio, we had, in-home infusion, immunoglobulin replacement, and it was so much more cumbersome than it is now. So we're evolving, and hopefully we can evolve to include that with what you just said. Thank you for clarifying the de-identified. I forgot to do that.
We definitely we know we have a lot of at-home infusions and at-home administration of the products, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Welcome to the conference, and hope everybody else finishes with 4 minutes to spare all week, and we'll all be in good shape. All right, thanks.
Thank you.